You have been trying to change your life from the outside. You have been taking action, saying affirmations, doing all the things you were told to do, and still, the same patterns keep returning, the same doubts, the same results. The problem is not what you are doing. It is what you are feeding your mind when no one is watching, in the silent moments between everything else. Neville Goddard called it the mental diet. He said it is the most important discipline a person can practice, not because it is a technique, but because it is the actual mechanism through which your reality is formed. Your inner conversations, the running dialogue inside your head, are not just noise. They are the literal instructions you are feeding your subconscious mind every single moment of every single day. And your subconscious mind, without judgment, without filter, takes whatever you repeatedly give it and builds it into your outer world. This is the truth that changes everything. Your life right now is the printout of what you have been feeding your subconscious mind. Not what you consciously wanted, but what you repeatedly rehearsed in your inner world. The inner conversation you held about money, about your worth, about whether things are working out for you or against you, all of that has been shaping your reality in ways you may not have fully recognized until now. And this is not a small thing. This is the entire cause of where you are. The mental diet is not about pretending. It is not about forcing yourself to say things are fine when they are not. It is about becoming the conscious gatekeeper of what you allow into your inner world. Your subconscious does not evaluate what you give it. It does not decide whether your inner conversation is rational or destructive. It simply receives what you feed it and begins to build accordingly. Most people have never considered that their thoughts function like food, but the parallel is exact. When you eat something, your body does not argue with it. It digests it, absorbs it, and uses it to build and maintain every system inside you. Your mental inputs work the same way. Whatever inner conversation you rehearse, your subconscious absorbs it and begins structuring your external reality around it. This is why Neville called it a diet, because what you feed your mind daily becomes the architecture of your life. Think about what you have been feeding it. Think about the inner conversations you carry through your day, about your finances, your relationships, your sense of self. Are those conversations coming from the version of you who already has what you want, or from the version who is still waiting, still doubting, still speaking from lack? That inner conversation is the diet, and for most people the diet has been running on mental junk for years. Here is the angle most people miss entirely. When Neville spoke about the mental diet, he was not speaking about controlling your conscious thoughts the way most productivity teachers suggest. He was speaking about something far more radical, the total transformation of your inner conversation as a daily way of life. The difference matters deeply. Thinking a positive thought occasionally is like eating one healthy meal a week and expecting your body to change. The subconscious mind does not respond to occasional inputs, it responds to dominant ones. What you return to most often, what you feel most deeply, what you rehearse most consistently, that is what your subconscious accepts as the truth of your world, and it builds your life from that truth, whether you are aware of it or not. Consider someone who is in financial struggle. They might have moments throughout the day where they remind themselves that things will get better, but if the majority of their inner conversations are about bills, about what they cannot afford, about the fear of falling further behind, those are the dominant inputs. The occasional hopeful thought is overwhelmed by the consistent inner narrative of lack, and the outer reality continues to reflect that narrative back. The subconscious is simply doing what it was instructed to do. This is the loop most people are trapped in. The outer conditions look difficult, so the inner conversation rehearses difficulty, and the inner conversation rehearsing difficulty causes the subconscious to build more difficult conditions. And because the conditions continue looking the same, the inner conversation feels justified in staying the same. The loop sustains itself, nothing changes. The mental diet breaks the loop at the only point where it can be broken, which is always on the inside. It changes the inner conversation first, deliberately and consistently, and allows the outer conditions to follow. This is the inversion Neville Goddard taught, not as a philosophical idea, but as a practical discipline practiced hour by hour. The inner world is changed before the outer world shows evidence of it. That is the entire principle. Imagine someone who has been replaying an argument with a family member for 3 weeks. Every time they think about this person, the inner conversation rehearses what was said, the feeling of being misunderstood, the bitterness of it. This replay is not just emotional processing. It is a signal being sent to the subconscious that this is the current state of that relationship. The subconscious, receiving that signal repeatedly, continues to reinforce the conditions that match it. The mental diet does not ask this person to pretend the argument did not happen. It asks them to consciously choose a different inner conversation about that person, one that reflects the relationship they actually want, and to hold that inner conversation with enough feeling and consistency that the subconscious receives it as real. This is where the discipline of the mental diet reveals its full weight. It is one thing to understand it intellectually. It is another thing entirely to practice it in the middle of your actual life. Neville Goddard said that the mental diet requires you to maintain control of your inner conversations for 24 hours. 24 consecutive hours where you refuse to rehearse lack, refuse to replay grievances, refuse to dwell in the inner narrative of everything that is not yet healed, not yet here, not yet what you want it to be. 24 hours where you consciously hold the inner conversation that belongs to the version of you who already lives in the reality you desire. That is the practice. That is the full requirement. He also said that most people cannot hold this for more than a few minutes before the old pattern reclaims them. Not because they are weak, but because the old inner conversation is a groove. It is a worn path the mind defaults to without conscious direction. Every thought that has been rehearsed hundreds of times becomes easier to think than a new one. The subconscious favors repetition. And the mental diet is the process of creating new repetitions deliberately and patiently until the new inner conversation becomes the groove. Think of it like physical rehabilitation after an injury. The old movement pattern has become compensatory, built around the wound. Every step reinforces it, and the rehabilitation process is slow and uncomfortable, not because the body is broken, but because a new pattern is being installed in place of one that has been running for a long time. The mind works identically. The mental diet is the rehabilitation of your inner world. It is uncomfortable. It requires your full attention, and it works precisely because it operates at the level where the old programming lives. You will notice when you begin that the mind wants to return to its default channel. You will be pulled back into the old inner conversation before you even realize it happened. This is not failure. This is the nature of the practice. The moment you notice, you redirect. Not with force, not with frustration, but with the calm certainty of someone who understands exactly what they are doing and why. And then you redirect again. Each redirection is a repetition. Each repetition is a vote for the new groove. And as you redirect, as you consistently return to the inner conversation of the reality you are building, something begins to shift. Not dramatically at first, but quietly. A sense of stability begins to grow beneath the surface, a sense that the inner world is becoming more solid, more aligned with what you actually want. That shift is not imaginary. That is the subconscious mind beginning to receive a new program. That is the diet beginning to work. What you are building right now in the silence of your inner world is more real than anything you can see around you. Because what is visible now was built by what was invisible then. And what you are holding invisibly today is already becoming the visible reality of your future. The hardest moment of the mental diet is not the beginning. It is the middle of an ordinary day, when something goes wrong, when the news arrives that you did not want, when the person responds in the way you feared, and your inner world floods instantly with the old conversation. That moment is the real test, and it is the moment most people misunderstand. They believe that a flooded inner world means the practice has failed. But Neville Goddard was clear. The moment of being pulled back is not failure. The redirection that follows it is the practice. You do not control whether the old conversation arrives. You develop the awareness to catch it and the discipline to choose again. That catching and choosing, repeated across the hours of a real day, is what the mental diet actually is. It is not a state of perfect inner silence. It is a continuous returning. Now consider what happens inside the subconscious when you begin this returning. The subconscious is always listening, always recording what is dominant in your inner world. When you are lost in the old conversation, it records that. When you redirect and hold the new inner conversation, it records that too. What determines which program the subconscious acts on is not a single moment of perfect clarity. It is the balance of what is repeated most. And every redirection shifts that balance, slightly but measurably, toward the new inner world you are building. This is why Neville said the diet must be maintained for 24 hours. Not because 24 hours is a magic number, but because it is long enough for your dominant inner conversation to shift from the old pattern to the new one. It is long enough for the subconscious to begin receiving a clearly different signal. Most people have never tried to govern their inner world for a full day. They have tried for a few minutes during a quiet morning, or for the length of a meditation session before life arrives and pulls them back. But the mental diet is a full-day practice, from the moment awareness arrives in the morning to the moment sleep takes you at night. And here is what makes this discipline different from every other inner work practice you may have tried. It does not ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be consistent. Perfection means never falling into the old conversation. Consistency means returning to the new one every time you notice you have left it. That distinction is everything, because it means the practice is never lost. Every moment of awareness is an entry point. Every redirection is a step, and the subconscious is counting not whether you fell, but whether you got back up and returned to the inner world you are building. Now here is where the practice reveals its sharpest edge. The outer world does not cooperate with your new inner conversation. It continues to reflect the old program, because the old program is what built it. Your bank account still shows the number that came from the old inner conversation. Your relationship still carries the dynamic that came from it. And the challenge of the mental diet is to hold a new inner conversation while standing in the middle of conditions built by the old one. This is where most people fail, not because the practice does not work, but because they try to match their inner conversation to what the outer world is showing them. They look at what exists and then speak within themselves about what exists. They call this being realistic, but Neville Goddard made a distinction that cuts through this entirely. He said there is a difference between what is real and what is true. What is real is what currently exists in the visible world. What is true is the assumption you are now holding in your inner world, and the inner truth always becomes the outer reality, given time and repetition. The person who looks at their empty bank account and holds an inner conversation about abundance is not in denial. They are applying the exact principle that built the bank account they currently see. Because the inner conversation about lack, held consistently, is what the subconscious used to build those conditions. The mental diet simply redirects that mechanism. Think of an actor preparing for a role that is nothing like their current life. They may be struggling financially, they may be living in a small apartment, but the character they are preparing to embody is confident, successful, and at peace. And the actor does not wait until their outer life matches the character before they step into the inner life of that character. They inhabit it first, in rehearsal, in private, until it becomes natural. This is precisely what the mental diet asks of you. Not to perform a role falsely in front of others, but to privately and consistently inhabit the inner conversation of the version of you who already lives in the reality you desire. To rehearse it until the subconscious accepts it as simply who you are. And here is the critical thing to understand. You do not need the outer world to confirm your inner conversation for it to be working. The subconscious does not require visible evidence before it begins to build. It builds from the signal you give it, before any evidence arrives. This is the certainty that Neville described, not optimism, not wishful thinking, but the settled knowledge that the inner world is always the cause and the outer world is only ever the effect. You hold the inner conversation of the cause, you tend it, you protect it. The effect will arrange itself accordingly. What you are choosing, in the middle of a life that has not yet changed on the surface, is the inner world from which a new life will be built. That choice is not small. That choice is everything. Here is what most people are waiting for, and it is the thing that keeps them from ever experiencing it. They are waiting for the mental diet to produce a visible result before they fully commit to it. They want proof that the inner conversation is working before they hold it with full belief. But the inner conversation requires your full belief before the proof arrives. This is the precise point where most people break. They give half a commitment, receive no visible evidence, and conclude the practice does not work. But this is not a failure of the practice. It is a failure to understand how the practice works. The subconscious does not build from partial signals. It builds from dominant ones. And a half-committed inner conversation, mixed with heavy doses of doubt and old narrative, does not create a dominant signal. It creates static. Think of a radio tower sending a signal. The tower must broadcast at a clear, consistent frequency for the receiver to pick it up cleanly. A signal interrupted by constant interference does not produce a clear broadcast. It produces noise. And the receiver, your outer reality, can only build from what it clearly receives. The mental diet is the practice of cleaning your frequency, removing the interference, choosing your broadcast and holding it with the kind of steady, quiet certainty that allows the subconscious to receive it without static. You do not do this by force. You do not grip the new inner conversation with willpower. You hold it the way you hold something you already know to be true. Think of how you feel when you know the sun will rise tomorrow. You do not strain toward that certainty. You simply rest in it. It is settled. The mental diet, at its deepest level, is the practice of bringing that quality of settled knowing to your inner conversation about your desired reality. Not hope, not effort, not desperate visualization. Just a quiet, internal certainty. The way someone who has ordered something and knows it is on its way does not pace anxiously by the door. They go about their day. But somewhere beneath the surface, there is a quiet knowing. It is already coming. And as you hold it, something begins to happen that you cannot fully see yet. The subconscious, receiving a clear and consistent signal, begins to work in ways that are not visible from the surface. Circumstances begin to rearrange. Conversations begin to shift. Doors begin to open that you were not aware existed. You will notice the changes before you understand them. A slight ease where there was tension, an unexpected opening where there was a wall. The outer world beginning to reorganize itself around the inner world you have been quietly building. And what you will realize when the shift becomes undeniable is that it was always working. From the very first moment you chose a different inner conversation, from the very first redirection, from the very first quiet return to the inner world you decided to build, it was already in motion. The outer world just needed time to catch up with what you had already made true inside. The moment something begins to work is the moment most people stop doing what made it work. You start the mental diet. You feel the shift beginning, something subtle and quiet beneath the surface. And then the mind convinces you that you have arrived, that the discipline can relax, that you have already done enough. This is the most important thing to understand about the mental diet at this stage. It is not a technique you apply once and then discard. It is a way of being that you grow into over time, until it becomes the only way you know how to live. Think about the way water shapes stone, not through a single powerful strike, but through consistent, quiet repetition. A single drop of water does not move a stone. 10,000 drops, falling in the same place every single day, begin to carve a new path through something that seemed completely immovable. Your subconscious mind works on the same principle. The new inner conversation you are building does not transform your reality in a single dramatic moment. It transforms it the way water shapes stone, slowly, precisely, and with an absolute certainty that comes from the nature of the process itself. The people who give up on the mental diet always give up for the same reason. They expect a sudden shift and receive a quiet one instead. They expect the outer world to announce the change loudly and clearly. But the subconscious does not work in announcements. It works in slow reorganizations that happen beneath the surface before they become visible above it. Consider a seed planted in the ground. In the days immediately following, there is nothing visible to confirm that anything is happening. The soil looks the same, the surface is unchanged, and if you judge the process by what you could see, you would conclude that nothing is occurring. But beneath the surface, the seed has already broken open. The root has already reached down. The process that will eventually produce the visible plant has been fully initiated by the invisible. The mental diet is this process, applied to the inner world. Neville Goddard understood this deeply. He never said the inner world would change your outer world immediately. He said the inner world would change your outer world inevitably. The difference between those two words is the difference between someone who gives up at day 3 and someone who watches their life transform in ways they could not have predicted. What you are doing with every redirected inner conversation is planting. And the planting always precedes the harvest by a period that feels to the impatient mind like nothing is happening. But the harvest is not late. The schedule simply runs beneath the surface where the eyes cannot reach. Now here is what nobody tells you about reaching the far side of the mental diet. The discipline eventually stops feeling like discipline. This is the sign that the new inner conversation has become the dominant groove. You begin to notice that the old inner narrative requires effort to maintain, where once it was effortless. You catch yourself needing to reach for doubt, needing to search for the old worried voice, rather than that voice arriving automatically. This reversal is one of the clearest signs that the subconscious has received the new program and begun to reorganize itself around it. Think of someone who has spent years eating in a way that did not serve them. The old foods were familiar, comfortable, reached for without thinking. When they change their diet, the healthy choices require deliberate effort at first. But over time, something shifts. The body begins to crave what it has been consistently fed. The new choices become natural, and the old cravings begin to feel foreign. This is precisely what happens with the mental diet. The new inner conversation, held with consistency and feeling, becomes the mind's natural default. The subconscious begins to find the old narrative uncomfortable, not because you forced it away, but because you fed something different long enough that the new pattern became the familiar one. Most people never reach this reversal because they abandon the practice during the early period, when the outer world is still reflecting the old program, and the inner conversation still requires deliberate effort. They mistake the difficulty of the early stage for evidence that the process is not working. But the difficulty is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of transformation. And when this happens, your outer world begins to move with a momentum that can feel almost surprising. Not because something magical is occurring, but because the program driving your subconscious has fundamentally changed, and the outer world is doing exactly what it has always done, reflecting the inner world back to you. The quality of your relationships begins to shift. Not because the people around you have changed in isolation, but because the signal you are broadcasting has changed, and you are now attracting responses that match the new inner world. The opportunities that arrive begin to align with the inner conversation you have been holding. The conditions of your life begin to reorganize themselves around the assumption you have been consistently practicing. This is not coincidence. This is the mechanism working precisely as it was always designed to work. Your inner world was always the cause. The mental diet simply returns you to a conscious relationship with that cause. You have been waiting for the right moment to begin. You have been waiting for life to settle enough, for the noise to quiet enough, for the conditions to improve enough that a clear inner world would feel possible. But that moment does not arrive from the outside. It is made from the inside. The mental diet does not ask you to wait for stillness. It asks you to create it, not by controlling everything around you, but by choosing, again and again, what you give your inner world to hold. Think of a musician tuning an instrument in a noisy room. The noise does not stop and the other sounds do not disappear, but the musician turns their full attention to the instrument, to the tone, to the pitch, to the frequency being produced, and through that focused attention, amid all the noise, the instrument is brought into tune. Your inner world is the instrument. The mental diet is the tuning. The noise of your circumstances does not need to stop for you to begin. You bring your full attention to what you are choosing to hold inside, and you begin tuning it, quietly and precisely, regardless of what surrounds you. And the tuned instrument begins to produce a different sound. And that sound, over time, fills the room, and the room itself begins to reflect what the instrument is producing. This is the whole of it. This is what Neville Goddard meant when he placed the mental diet above every other practice, above affirmations, above visualization, above any technique or ritual. Because none of those practices can produce lasting change if the inner conversation running beneath them is still broadcasting the old program. The mental diet reaches the level where change actually happens. It goes beneath the surface thought, beneath the conscious intention, down into the place where your assumptions about yourself and your world live and breathe and quietly build everything you call your life. You are not changing your thoughts. You are changing what you believe to be true. And the difference between those two things is the difference between someone who tries to think differently for a few minutes and someone who actually lives differently from this moment forward. The life you want is not somewhere in the future waiting to be earned. It is already fully formed inside the inner world you are capable of holding right now. The mental diet is simply the practice of holding it long enough and consistently enough for the outer world to have no choice but to catch up. You already know what inner conversation belongs to the version of you who lives in that reality. You have felt it in moments of clarity. The mental diet is the commitment to making that inner conversation your permanent address, not a destination you visit occasionally, but the place you live from every hour, every day, until the inner and outer world are finally one. That is the whole practice. That is the whole power. And it begins the moment you choose it.